all eyes happen to be on Geneva, where officials from the United States and Russia are currently holding talks to discuss the crisis that is unfolding in Ukraine and also Moscow's demands for security guarantees. Now, the amassing of Russian troops along the border with Ukraine and also equipment along the border with Ukraine has, of course, caused a lot of worry in Kiev and also in the West. Officials on both sides have expressed pessimism about any concrete breakthrough from the US-Russia security talks that are currently underway. On Sunday, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov had met with his US counterpart Wendy Sherman for a working dinner and described the 2-hour-long conversation as a pretty difficult one. And right ahead of the talks, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken also warned that Russia had to choose between dialogue and confrontation.
There you go.
Hello.
All right, now to give us more updates in terms of what is expected of these talks that are presently underway in Geneva, we are joined in by our correspondent Julia Chapman, who's joining us live from Moscow on this broadcast. Good afternoon to you, Julia. So what is expected of these talks that are being presently held in Geneva? Now, Moscow has put forth its demands very clearly. It says that it does not want the NATO alliance to expand any further along Eastern Europe. Is this a demand that the West is likely to concede to?
It certainly isn't, and the starting point for these negotiations from Russia and the United States are very different. Certainly, Russia is coming at this with an expectation that there are demands that it wants to be met. From the US perspective, it has already dismissed some of those demands. It says these talks are primarily strategic security, strategic stability talks that have been long planned with regards to possibly getting back on track some arms control agreements between Russia and the United States. But they have certainly been sidelined by the ongoing security issues regarding Ukraine. The US accuses Russia of a significant military buildup on the Ukrainian border, which Russia hasn't acknowledged, but it also says it hasn't got any intention of invading its neighbor. But Russia certainly has these demands that it has outlined in 2 wish lists, one for the United States and one for NATO. But the main headline demands are that NATO stops expanding eastwards, never includes Ukraine in its membership, and that there is an agreement to stop positioning offensive weapons in Eastern Europe on the Russian border. Certainly with regards to NATO membership, that is simply not on the table, with Western officials saying that Russia does not have a veto power over NATO membership of any country. They say that there could be some area of negotiation with regards to military drills, where they are carried out and when, but certainly there is different expectations from both sides on what actually can be achieved. And as I say, they are coming at this from very different starting points.
Very different starting points, and that is one of the fears, that these talks could effectively yield pretty much very little. And that brings us to the tensions along the border in eastern Ukraine, where according to reports, at least about 100,000 Russian troops have been amassed. How do we see this situation getting diffused in the coming next days and weeks, if at all, of the possibility that this situation can get diffused?
Well, certainly the US hopes that the situation can be diffused, but it says that these talks shouldn't be held at a state of confrontation. They should be held in the spirit of dialogue, and they don't want this to be an ultimatum being offered by Russia to the West, if it's not met, would result in an invasion of Ukraine. Russia has denied making that threat, but certainly that is the feeling in the West, that is the possibility that there could be a greater conflict that unfolds in the coming weeks if there isn't some sort of a negotiation that comes to fruition in these various talks happening this week. But of course, it isn't just the US that's holding these talks. There will also be Russia-NATO Council discussions later in the week, as well as an OSCE meeting aimed at focusing on Ukrainian and wider European security. But Russia, as I say, denies any intention to escalate the situation already ongoing in Ukraine. Of course, Russian-backed troops are already fighting protecting Ukrainian forces in the country. They have been since 2014. That's a conflict that has seen some 13,000 people killed, according to the government in Kiev. And there are fears that if these talks do not result in any kind of agreement between Russia and the West, that this could certainly escalate into a much bigger conflict.
Absolutely indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Julia Chapman, for joining us and getting us all those updates there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.